The morning sun peeked through the kitchen curtains as Martha Kingsley watered her prized tomato plants on the windowsill. At 42, she had found peace in the simple rhythms of small-town life in Pinehaven. Her shoulder-length brown hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her hands showed the honest wear of someone who worked in gardens and sorted library books rather than shuffled legal papers. "You're looking good today," she whispered to the smallest plant, which had finally sprouted its first tiny green tomato. Martha took joy in these little victories. She checked the clock. Still enough time to finish her tea before heading to the library where she volunteered 3 days a week. The distance between her quiet life here and her husband's high-profile world in Washington, D.C. sometimes felt much greater than the 200 miles on the map. Robert Kingsley had been appointed to the Supreme Court just 8 months ago, but they had made this arrangement years before when his legal career first began drawing national attention. "I married you, not the spotlight," Martha had told him. And Robert understood. He kept an apartment in D.C. while Martha maintained their family home, the place where they could still be just Rob and Marty on weekends, away from the cameras and the pressure of being a public figure. Martha rinsed her teacup and grabbed her worn canvas bag. The spring air felt fresh as she stepped outside and walked to her old blue sedan. The car wasn't fancy. Robert had offered to buy her something newer many times, but she loved its reliability and the fact that it blended in. No one in Pinehaven connected the quiet library volunteer with the brilliant legal mind making headlines in the capital. She drove the familiar route toward the library, mentally planning the children's reading hour she would lead that afternoon. The stop sign at Maple and Pine appeared ahead, and Martha slowed, coming to a complete stop as she always did. She looked left, right, then left again before proceeding through the intersection. The flash of police lights in her rearview mirror came as a complete surprise. Martha pulled over immediately, confused but not worried. In 20 years of driving, she'd never gotten so much as a parking ticket. The officer approached, a man she didn't recognize, which was unusual in their small town. "License and registration, ma'am," he said, his face giving away nothing. "Of course, officer. May I ask what the problem is?" Martha handed over her documents. "You ran that stop sign back there." His tone left no room for discussion. Martha's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, but I'm certain I came to a complete stop. I always do, especially at that intersection." The officer didn't respond to her protest, just studied her license with unusual interest. "Kingsley," he said finally. "Any relation to that Supreme Court fellow?" Martha hesitated. She'd grown used to deflecting these questions. "It's a common enough name," she said with a small smile, neither confirming nor denying. The officer handed back her documents along with a ticket. "You can contest it in court if you want, but my dash cam caught you clear as day." Martha thanked him politely, though confusion and frustration bubbled beneath her calm exterior. She knew she had stopped. Why would he claim otherwise? She continued to the library, trying to shake off the unsettling encounter. Mrs. Chen, the head librarian, noticed her distraction immediately. "Something's bothering you," she said, not really a question. Martha explained what had happened while they sorted returned books. "That's strange," Mrs. Chen said. "I've never known you to break traffic laws, and I've never seen a ticket given at that intersection before. It's usually just the highway patrol trying to meet quotas." "I'll just pay it," Martha decided. "It's not worth the hassle." But over the next few days, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When she mentioned the incident to a few trusted friends, she heard whispers about other unusual traffic stops, all involving properties in the old historic district, where Martha's small inherited house from her grandmother stood. A week later, Martha received a court summons. The simple traffic ticket had somehow been elevated to a more serious offense. The date was set for the following Tuesday in Judge Howard Freeman's courtroom. "Don't worry," her friend at the coffee shop assured her. "These things get dismissed all the time." But Martha felt a chill as she remembered the officer's interest in her last name. Something told her this was just the beginning of troubles to come, troubles that would soon force her to bridge the carefully separated worlds she and Robert had built. Judge Howard Freeman smoothed his expensive tie as he reviewed the day's court schedule in his chambers. His fingers stopped at the name Kingsley on the traffic violations list. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't quite place it. Probably nothing important. What mattered was that this Kingsley woman owned a corner property in the historic district, a property that his friends at Westlake Development had been eyeing for months. The judge was a tall man with a full head of silver hair that gave him an air of authority. At 58, he had controlled the county courthouse for nearly 15 years. Local lawyers called his courtroom the kingdom behind his back, a place where Freeman's word was the only law that truly mattered. "Your Honor," his clerk poked her head in, "Mr. Dawson is here to see you." Freeman's thin lips curved into what passed for a smile. "Sent him in." Pete Dawson didn't look like a wealthy real estate developer in his worn jeans and work boots. That was his secret. He blended in, just a local boy who'd made good. But the watch on his wrist cost more than most people in Penhaven made in 3 months. "Tell me you have good news," Dawson said, settling into the leather chair across from Freeman without waiting for an invitation. "Patience," the judge replied. "These things take finesse. We've got a Kingsley on the docket today. Owns that corner house your company wants." Dawson leaned forward. "Martha Kingsley, the quiet lady who volunteers at the library. Traffic violation, minor thing, but it could be useful." The judge tapped his pen against the file. "We apply a little pressure, maybe find some other violations, and suddenly selling that property becomes very attractive to her." "Kingsley," Dawson repeated, his brow furrowing. "Why does that name sound familiar beyond just the town?" The judge waved his hand dismissively. "Common enough name. The important thing is that her property is the last one we need to complete the block. Once we have it, the historical designation can be challenged, and your shopping complex gets the green light." What neither man knew yet was just how uncommon the Kingsley name would prove to be. The judge walked into his courtroom at exactly 9 o'clock a.m., his black robes flowing behind him like a king's cape. The room fell silent as he took his seat at the bench, looking down at everyone from his elevated position. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Howard Freeman," the bailiff called out, though everyone was already standing. Freeman scanned the room with cold eyes that had seen thousands of people come and go, most of them leaving worse off than when they arrived. His gaze stopped on a woman in the third row. Brown hair, simple clothes, nothing special about her. That must be the Kingsley woman. He began with simpler cases, parking tickets, minor disputes, handling them quickly, sometimes barely letting people finish speaking before making his ruling. The message was clear. This was his courtroom, his rules. "Martha Kingsley," the bailiff finally called. Martha walked forward, her hands clasped tightly together to hide their slight trembling. She'd never been in trouble before, and the courtroom felt overwhelming. "Miss Kingsley, you're charged with running a stop sign on Maple Street and Pine Avenue," Judge Freeman said, looking down at her file rather than at her. "How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Martha said clearly, though her voice was quiet. "I came to a complete stop. I always do at that intersection." Something in her tone made Freeman look up and study her more carefully. She didn't look afraid enough. Most people who came before him were intimidated into quick, guilty pleas. "Officer Reynolds," the judge called, "please present your evidence." The officer who had pulled Martha over stepped forward. "Your Honor, my dash cam clearly shows the defendant's vehicle rolling through the stop sign without coming to a complete stop." "May I see this footage?" Martha asked politely. Freeman's eyes narrowed slightly. "The court accepts Officer Reynolds' testimony. The footage is part of police evidence." "But," Martha began. "Miss Kingsley," the judge cut her off, "are you questioning the integrity of one of our fine officers?" Martha felt a chill run down her spine. Something was very wrong here. "No, Your Honor, but I believe there's been a mistake." Freeman leaned forward. "A mistake? Let me be clear, Miss Kingsley. This court does not make mistakes. In fact, while reviewing your case, I discovered you have an outstanding warrant from Camden County." Martha's mouth fell open in shock. "That's not possible. I've never—" "Bailiff," Freeman interrupted, "please take Miss Kingsley into custody while we sort this matter out." Hearing continued until tomorrow morning. As the bailiff approached, Martha looked around the courtroom in disbelief. How had a simple traffic ticket turned into this nightmare? And why did the judge seem to take such personal interest in her case? What she didn't see was the small nod between Freeman and Pete Dawson at the back of the courtroom. The trap was set. Now they just needed to apply more pressure. Martha spent the night in a holding cell, a small space with grey walls and a hard bench that served as both seat and bed. The thin blanket did little against the cold air. She had never imagined herself in such a place. The whole situation felt like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. "First time?" asked an older woman in the cell next to hers. Her name was Doris, and despite her situation, kindness showed in her tired eyes. "Yes," Martha answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was in court for a traffic ticket I didn't deserve. Then suddenly the judge said I had a warrant. But that's impossible." Doris nodded knowingly. "Let me guess, Judge Freeman?" Martha looked up in surprise. "How did you know?" "Been happening to folks around here for years. Especially people who own property in certain neighborhoods." Doris leaned closer to the bars separating them. "My sister lost her place last year. Started with a noise complaint, ended with her selling to some company for half what it was worth." Martha's mind raced. Her small house in the historic district had been her grandmother's. She'd refused several offers to buy it over the past year. Morning came too quickly. Martha was led back to the courtroom, now wearing the orange jumpsuit they'd given her. She felt exposed and diminished, exactly as intended. Judge Freeman looked down at her with cold eyes. "Ms. Kingsley, we've confirmed the warrant from Camden County. Additionally, based on that warrant, police conducted a search of your home." "You searched my home?" Martha couldn't hide her shock. "That can't be legal." The judge's expression hardened. "Watch your tone in my courtroom. The search was completely legal under the circumstances, and what they found is very concerning." A police officer approached the bench with a small plastic bag. Inside were several white pills. "These were discovered in your bathroom cabinet," the judge continued. "Prescription medication not in a proper container, with no prescription label." Martha stared at the bag in disbelief. "Those aren't mine. I don't take any prescription medications." "Then how do you explain their presence in your home?" Freeman asked, eyebrow raised. "I can't, because they weren't there before." Martha's voice grew stronger as anger began to replace her fear. "Someone put them there." Whispers filled the courtroom. Judge Freeman banged his gavel. Silence. "Ms. Kingsley, are you accusing the police of planting evidence? That's a serious allegation." Before Martha could respond, the courtroom doors opened and a slender woman in an inexpensive suit rushed in. "Your Honor, I'm Linda Weaver from the Public Defender's Office. I've been assigned to Ms. Kingsley's case." Freeman looked annoyed at the interruption. "You're late, Ms. Weaver." "I apologize, Your Honor. I was only assigned this case 30 minutes ago." Linda turned to Martha. "May I have a moment with my client?" The judge sighed dramatically. 5 minutes. Linda led Martha to a corner of the courtroom. "They're moving unusually fast with your case," she whispered. "Something's not right here." "Nothing's right," Martha replied. "The traffic violation was false. I don't have any outstanding warrants, and those pills aren't mine." Linda glanced toward the judge, who was watching them closely. "Listen carefully. Judge Freeman has a reputation. He works with developers who want properties in the historic district. Do you own property there?" Martha nodded. "My grandmother's house. I've had offers but never wanted to sell." "That explains it." Linda checked her watch. "Our time's almost up. For now, say as little as possible. I'll try to get you bail, but Freeman will likely set it high." They returned to their places, and as Linda predicted, the judge set bail at $50,000, an impossible amount for Martha. "Your Honor, my client has no criminal record," Linda protested. "She's a well-respected member of the community." "The decision stands," Freeman said firmly. "Ms. Kingsley now faces charges of possession of controlled substances in addition to the outstanding warrant. She'll remain in custody until trial." As Martha was led away, she noticed a man in the back of the courtroom. The same one who had been speaking with the judge yesterday. He was smiling. That evening in her cell, Martha stared at the ceiling, thinking about her husband. Robert would know what to do, but she had always handled problems on her own. Their agreement to keep their lives separate had seemed so important, a way to protect her privacy and his career. The woman in the next cell was gone, replaced by someone who didn't want to talk. Martha felt more alone than ever. The walls seemed to close in around her as she realized this was just the beginning of what the judge had planned. Tomorrow would bring new charges, new lies. Martha closed her eyes. Maybe it was time to make that call. The local newspaper arrived at homes across Pinehaven the next morning with Martha's face on the front page. The headline read, "Local woman charged with drug possession, more crimes suspected." The photo showed her in the orange jumpsuit, looking confused and afraid, exactly the image Judge Freeman wanted the town to see. Martha hadn't seen the paper, but she felt its effects when Linda visited her in the Holbing area before her next hearing. "People are talking," Linda said, her voice low. "The story makes you sound guilty already. It mentions your house specifically, calls it a property of interest in an ongoing investigation. How can they print lies like that?" Martha asked, wringing her hands. "Small-town paper, friendly with the courthouse." Linda sighed. "Look, I tried to reach your regular attorney, but he's out of town at a conference. Convenient timing." Martha thought about Mrs. Chen and her other friends at the library, about her neighbors who had known her for years. Would they believe these stories, or would they stand by her? "There's something else," Linda added, glancing around to make sure no guards were listening. "I did some digging. Westlake Development has bought 7 properties in the historic district in the last year. All from people who suddenly had legal troubles with Judge Freeman." Martha's stomach tightened. "My grandmother's house is right in the middle of those properties." "Exactly. They need your land to complete whatever they're planning." Linda checked her watch. "We have to go in now. Remember, say as little as possible." The courtroom was packed this time. Martha recognized many faces from town as she was led in, still wearing the jail jumpsuit. Some people looked away. Others whispered behind their hands. She spotted Mrs. Chen, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Judge Freeman seemed pleased by the crowd. He shuffled papers importantly before looking up. "We're here for a status hearing in the case of Martha Kingsley," he announced. "Multiple charges including drug possession and now interference with an official investigation." "Interference?" Linda stood quickly. "Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing of such a charge." Freeman fixed her with a cold stare. "Your client made several phone calls from jail yesterday, attempting to have others remove evidence from her property before police could complete their search." "That's not true," Martha blurted out, unable to help herself. "I only called my friend to water my plants." Silence. Freeman banged his gavel. "One more outburst, and I'll have you removed from my courtroom." Linda placed a calming hand on Martha's arm. "Your Honor, my client has the right to make calls." There was no restriction placed on her communications. "Nevertheless, there is now." The judge shuffled more papers. "Ms. Kingsley's communication privileges are suspended pending investigation of these new charges." Martha felt the room spinning around her. They were cutting her off from everyone, isolating her completely. No calls meant no way to reach Robert, no way to tell him what was happening. Additionally, Freeman continued, "I'm scheduling the preliminary hearing for next Monday at 8 a.m. Linda stood again. "Your Honor, I have another case scheduled then. I filed a motion for continuance." Motion denied. Freeman didn't even look up. "If you can't be present, Ms. Kingsley will need to find new representation." As they left the courtroom, Martha noticed the same man from before watching from the back row. This time he stepped forward, blocking their path. "Miss Kingsley?" Pete Dawson from Westlake Development. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Seems like you're having a rough time. My company might be able to help." Linda stepped between them. "My client isn't interested in discussing business matters at this time." Dawson handed Martha a business card anyway. "We're still very interested in your grandmother's property. Our offer stands, though given your current situation, the price would naturally be adjusted. Think about it. Bail money doesn't grow on trees." That night, alone in her cell, Martha stared at the ceiling as the lights went out. 3 days ago, she had been a respected member of the community. Now she was being portrayed as a criminal, cut off from friends, and pressured to sell her property. She thought of Robert in Washington, probably working late on some important case, completely unaware that his wife was sitting in a jail cell. Their agreement to keep their lives separate had seemed so sensible before. Now it felt like a chain holding her down. A guard walked by, flashlight beam sweeping across the cells. "Excuse me," Martha called out softly. "I need to make a call." "No calls," the guard replied without stopping. Judge's orders. Martha sank back onto the hard bench. They had thought of everything, but they didn't know who she was married to. They didn't know that when Robert Kingsley eventually discovered what was happening to his wife, no small-town judge would be able to stand in his way. She just had to find a way to reach him first. 3 weeks had passed since Martha's first appearance in Judge Freeman's courtroom. 3 weeks of new charges, delayed hearings, and growing isolation. Her world had shrunk to the small cell, brief meetings with Linda, and tense courtroom appearances where the judge seemed to enjoy watching her hope fade a little more each day. Today's hearing felt different. Martha could sense it as soon as she entered the courtroom. Judge Freeman looked particularly pleased with himself, shuffling papers with an almost cheerful energy. Pete Dawson sat in the front row, not even trying to hide his connection to the proceedings anymore. "All rise," the bailiff called as Freeman took his seat. Linda leaned close to Martha. "Something's happening. They look too confident." Martha nodded. In the past 3 weeks, she'd learned to read the signs. Bad news was coming. "Ms. Kingsley," Judge Freeman began, "your case continues to develop in concerning ways. The investigation has uncovered evidence of potential money laundering through your property in the historic district." A gasp went through the courtroom. Money laundering was a serious charge, far beyond the minor issues they'd accused her of before. "Your Honor," Linda stood immediately, "this is absurd. My client is a library volunteer with no criminal history. These charges appear from nowhere with no warning or evidence." "The evidence is quite clear," Freeman replied coldly. "Bank records show unusual deposits coinciding with renovations to the property. We believe the house was used to clean money from illegal activities." Martha felt her knees weaken. They were fabricating everything now, not even trying to make the lies believable. Her small savings account had never held more than a few $1,000s. Anyone could check that. "I request immediate access to this so-called evidence," Linda demanded. "In due time." Judge Freeman smiled thinly. "Given the seriousness of these new allegations, I'm setting bail at $500,000. The number hit Martha like a physical blow. $500,000. It might as well be $1 billion. There was no way she could pay that. "Your Honor, that amount is punitive and excessive," Linda argued. "It violates my client's rights under the 8th Amendment." Freeman's expression hardened. "Your objection is noted and overruled. Ms. Kingsley will remain in custody until trial or until bail is posted. Next case." The gavel came down with finality. As Martha was led away, she heard Pete Dawson speaking to someone. "Give her another week in jail. She'll be begging to sell that property." Back in the holding area, Linda looked defeated. "Martha, I've done everything I can, but they're rigging the system against us. Every motion I file gets denied. Evidence goes missing. Witnesses suddenly become unavailable." Martha nodded numbly. "What happens now?" "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week, but Freeman will just use it to add more charges." Linda paused, choosing her words carefully. "Martha, is there anyone else who could help? Family? Friends with connections?" Martha thought of Robert. 3 weeks she'd resisted calling him, trying to handle this herself, not wanting to disrupt his important work. 3 weeks of watching the situation get worse while protecting a separate life that now seemed meaningless in the face of this injustice. "There is someone," she said quietly. Linda looked relieved. "Good. I'll try to get your phone privileges restored, but they'll fight it. Judge Freeman has made sure you're completely cut off." After Linda left, a young guard Martha hadn't seen before brought dinner to her cell. As he slid the tray through the slot, he whispered, "Mrs. Chen from the library asked me to check on you. Said you were a good person who helped her son learn to read." Martha felt tears spring to her eyes at this small kindness. "Thank you. Could you tell her I'm okay?" The guard nodded, then glanced around quickly. She also asked if you needed anything. "Phone call, maybe? I could let you use mine for 2 minutes. Not supposed to, but what they're doing to you ain't right." Martha's heart leaped. "Yes," she whispered. A phone call would mean everything. That evening, when the main guard went on break, the young guard slipped back to her cell. He passed a cell phone through the bars. 2 minutes, he reminded her. "And you never got this from me." With shaking hands, Martha dialed the private number only she knew, the one Robert always answered no matter what. It rang once, twice. "Hello. His familiar voice nearly broke her composure. "Robert," she said, fighting back tears. "It's me. I need your help. I'm in jail in Pinehaven. A judge named Freeman is framing me to get my grandmother's house." "Martha?" His voice sharpened with concern. "What?" "No time," she interrupted. "They've cut off my communication. This is a borrowed phone. Judge Howard Freeman, Westlake County Courthouse. Please come." "I'll be there in 3 hours," Robert said without hesitation. His tone had changed, becoming harder, focused. "Don't worry. Don't say another word to anyone." As she handed the phone back to the guard, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 weeks. Hope. The corrupt judge had no idea what was coming his way. The courthouse was unusually busy the next morning. Whispers spread through the hallways, something big was happening. Extra security guards stood at doorways, looking nervous and alert. No one seemed to know exactly what was going on, but everyone could feel the tension in the air. Judge Freeman arrived earlier than usual, annoyed by a call from the court clerk about a change to his schedule. As he hung up his coat in his chambers, he noticed a folder on his desk that hadn't been there the day before. Inside were printouts of bank statements, his own offshore accounts, the ones no one was supposed to know about. A cold feeling spread through his chest. He quickly locked the folder in his desk drawer and tried to calm his racing heart. It was probably nothing. Maybe his financial advisor had sent the documents. Yes, that had to be it. The courtroom filled quickly as Martha's case was called first on the docket. People squeezed into every available seat, drawn by the rumors flying around town. Martha sat beside Linda, looking different today. The defeat in her eyes had been replaced by something else, a quiet confidence that puzzled the judge. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Howard Freeman," the bailiff announced. Freeman took his seat, scanning the courtroom with narrowed eyes. Something was off. In the back row, he spotted 3 people he didn't recognize, 2 men and a woman in expensive suits, taking notes and watching him intently. "First case," he announced, trying to keep his voice steady. "State versus Martha Kingsley." Before he could continue, the courtroom doors opened. A tall man with silver-streaked dark hair walked in, followed by 4 more people carrying briefcases. The newcomer had a commanding presence that drew all eyes in the room. "Your Honor," the man said, his deep voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent courtroom. "Robert Kingsley, representing the defendant, Martha Kingsley." Judge Freeman's face paled. Robert Kingsley. The name finally clicked into place. Supreme Court Justice Robert Kingsley. Martha wasn't just any small-town woman. She was married to one of the most powerful legal minds in the country. "Justice Kingsley," Freeman stammered, "this is unexpected. I wasn't aware you practiced trial law." "I make exceptions in special circumstances," Robert replied coolly. "I've taken a personal interest in this case." Freeman's eyes darted to Pete Dawson, who looked like he might be sick. Neither of them had connected Martha to the Supreme Court justice with the same last name. A terrible mistake. "Your Honor," Robert continued, "I filed emergency motions this morning with the federal court. Before we proceed, I'd like to introduce Special Agent Thompson from the FBI." One of the suited individuals in the back stood up. "We're investigating patterns of judicial misconduct and corruption in this jurisdiction," the agent announced. "We have reason to believe this case is part of that pattern." Murmurs swept through the courtroom. Judge Freeman banged his gavel, but the sound seemed weak and ineffective now. "This is highly irregular," he protested. "This is my courtroom, and Your courtroom is subject to federal oversight," Robert interrupted, "and we have evidence of serious misconduct. Agent Thompson has warrants to search court records and your financial documents." Freeman's face flushed red. "On what grounds?" Robert opened a folder. "We have documented 23 cases in the past 18 months where property owners in the historic district faced unusual legal troubles in your court. In each case, they eventually sold their properties to Westlake Development at below-market prices." The agent stepped forward. "We also have evidence of offshore accounts receiving payments from shell companies linked to Westlake Development." Pete Dawson stood up suddenly. "I need to leave. I have an appointment." "Sit down, Mr. Dawson," Robert said without looking at him. "Your appointment is right here." Martha watched in amazement as her husband systematically dismantled the corrupt system that had held her captive for weeks. He hadn't come alone or unprepared. While she had been suffering in jail, Robert had assembled a team of investigators who had worked through the night, uncovering years of corruption. "Your Honor," Robert said, his voice heavy with controlled anger, "I am requesting my wife's immediate release and dismissal of all charges, which were clearly fabricated as part of a conspiracy." The federal agents approached the bench with documents. Judge Freeman looked at them, then at the courtroom full of watching eyes, then at Robert Kingsley's stern face. His kingdom was crumbling around him. "Case dismissed," he muttered, hammering his gavel one last time before federal agents asked him to step down from the bench. As Martha was officially released, Robert took her hand. Their eyes met, saying everything words couldn't express. He hadn't just come as her husband. He had come as justice itself. The news spread through Pine Haven like wildfire. Judge Howard Freeman, the man who had ruled the county courthouse like his personal kingdom for 15 years, was now facing federal charges. Pete Dawson and 3 other executives from Westlake Development were also under investigation. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and curious townspeople as Martha and Robert emerged into the sunlight. "Mrs. Kingsley, is it true you're married to Supreme Court Justice Kingsley? Justice Kingsley, will you be handling the case personally? Martha, how does it feel to be free?" The questions came from all directions. Martha blinked in the bright light, still adjusting to her sudden freedom after weeks in a cell. Robert placed a protective arm around her shoulders and guided her through the crowd toward a waiting car. "No comments at this time," he said firmly. "My wife needs rest." When they reached the safety of their home, Martha stood in the middle of her living room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. Her plants had died from lack of water. Mail had piled up on the table. Everything seemed both familiar and strange. "I never thought I'd see this place again," she whispered. Robert set down his briefcase. "I'm so sorry, Martha. If I had known sooner." She turned to face him. "How did you do it? How did you put together enough evidence so quickly?" "I called in every favor I had," he answered, loosening his tie. "When I got your call, I contacted the FBI immediately. They'd already had suspicions about corruption in Westlake County, but needed a clear case to act on. Your situation gave them that opening." He pulled out his laptop and showed her files of evidence, patterns of cases where homeowners in the historic district faced sudden legal troubles, followed by property sales to Westlake Development. Bank records showing transfers to Judge Freeman's hidden accounts. Even phone records between the judge and Dawson. "They'd been doing this for years," Robert explained. "You weren't the first victim, but you'll be the last." The following days brought more revelations. 6 other people came forward with similar stories of being framed by Judge Freeman to pressure them into selling their properties. The difference was that Martha had something they didn't, a husband with the knowledge and resources to fight back. A week after Martha's release, she sat at her kitchen table with Mrs. Chen and 2 other friends, drinking tea and talking about the future. "The library hasn't been the same without you," Mrs. Chen said. "When will you come back?" Martha looked down at the papers spread across the table, plans for a new foundation she was creating. "I'm thinking of a different path now. So many people go through what I experienced, but don't have someone like Robert to help them." The doorbell rang. Martha opened it to find a woman she didn't recognize, clutching a newspaper. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said nervously. "My name is Doris. We met briefly in the holding cell." Martha smiled warmly. "Of course I remember. Please come in." Doris entered hesitantly. "I saw the news about the judge. About what you and your husband did." She paused. "My sister lost her house because of him. Is there any way she might get justice too?" "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you," Martha replied, leading her to the kitchen. "We're starting something new." 3 months later, Martha stood at a podium in front of the newly opened Kingsley Justice Center, a converted storefront in downtown Pine Haven. Cameras flashed as she cut the ribbon. "What happened to me could happen to anyone," she told the gathered crowd. "Our justice system only works when it works for everyone, not just those with power or connections. This center will provide legal help to anyone facing systemic abuse, regardless of their resources." Robert stood to the side, watching his wife with pride. He had recused himself from all federal cases related to Freeman's prosecution, maintaining ethical boundaries while supporting Martha's vision. Judge Freeman eventually accepted a plea deal, facing 10 years in prison for corruption, evidence tampering, and abuse of power. The historic district was now protected by new local laws, preventing the kind of development Westlake had planned. That evening, as Martha and Robert walked through their garden, planting new flowers where the old ones had died, she stopped and looked up at the courthouse visible on the hill above town. "You know what I realized," she said thoughtfully. "When they separated us, you in Washington, me here, they thought they were making me vulnerable. They never imagined our separation was actually our strength." Robert looked puzzled. "How so? If I'd been known as Justice Kingsley's wife all along, they might have targeted someone else instead, and that person might not have had a Supreme Court justice to call when things got bad." She squeezed his hand. "Sometimes justice needs to work from both ends, from the highest courts and from the smallest cells." Robert nodded, understanding. Their different worlds had come together when it mattered most, and now they were building something new from their experience, a bridge between power and the powerless, creating justice where it had been denied.